or if you're tuning in online somewhere else later on in the week, some other night, thanks for being here. Especially those of you who are here for the first time. My name is Ben, I'm the lead pastor, and one of the things that we do every week, or as often as we can, is we try to put our hands together to welcome a special group of men who are watching at Toledo Correctional right now on 15-2. We tell them thanks for joining us. We see you. We're so glad you're hanging out with us, and we started an important conversation a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it's been exciting for us as a staff team. We've been a few hundred over last year in attendance. We're seeing some growth because of the relevance, because you're talking about it, because we're seeing it impact some of your lives. And so thank you for being a part of this journey with us. And if you're here for the first time, I'm going to give you some homework, all right? I want you to go back, download our app, watch it online, and just go watch the first couple of weeks to begin to get the full picture of what it is that we're talking about. You see, one of my concerns, and I think the ongoing dialogue is more beneficial than any one week in particular. We're building week in and week out around this passage that was written 2,000 years ago to a group of Christians by a guy by the name of Paul. And each week we unpack a different nuance of it that I'm excited to get into this week. We're going to wrap up that passage next week. And then the first week in October 5th and 6th, we are going to do something really unique, something we've never really done before. I'm calling it a Netflix-worthy weekend experience where my friend Kelly, her husband Michael, we've been friends for over 15 years. About a year and a half ago, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she agreed to allow us to go on the journey with her. She captured some of the battle moments that she went through over that year and a half long journey. And it's going to be a powerful service. We'll be weaving some music throughout it, bringing a couple of strategic teaching elements, and it's going to give you an opportunity to see what it looks like to live out what we've been talking about in the midst of the battle for your life. So if you know someone who has a chronic illness or has battled cancer or is battling cancer, it's going to be a powerful weekend that you're going to be so glad that you were physically here with us. So that would be a great opportunity to invite. This week, we're going to continue our conversation. We're going to continue talking through how do we become anxious for nothing. And in some of my prep work, I found the Global Burden of Disease, a research project where they categorize countries based on the percentage of the population that struggles with anxiety. Look at this. Look at where the USA is. We are at like 6.6%. We are at the top end of all of the other countries. I mean, lower than us is Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, the United Kingdom. The good old Brits have it better than us. That's right. If you're watching in the UK, Benita, I know you watch occasionally. You're like, see, it's better over here. The world is like under 4%. Israel, China, Russia, and Honduras, they're half of what we are. I mean, are you seeing what I'm seeing? They should be anxious. And here we are. We're over here struggling. What's going on? I mean, to me, when I look at this, statistically speaking, we live in the safest and most prosperous nation the world has ever seen. I mean, for those of you that have anxiety, for those of you that are watching because you couldn't get through the anxious feelings to even physically come here, or if you're battling through them right now, man, I am so glad that you're here. You know that this is important, that we need to give voice to it. And so as I've been saying the last few weeks, take that deep breath. And man, what I want you to hear is that, yes, it is not a laughing matter. Anxiety is a real issue. One of the gifts that I think this series can bring our entire community is to break the stigma that if I have anxiety, I'm doing it wrong, I'm worthless, I'm a bad Christian, something's wrong with me, and instead go, no, this is a normal part of life. And for some of you, one of the best gifts that I think we can give is to give you permission to get medical and professional help. I'm not saying that this is for everyone, but man, it is highly treatable. If it's crippling anxiety and you're not talking to someone about it, man, you should get help. And I hope you hear me encouraging you, encouraging you to take that step. In fact, if you have loved ones who are struggling with anxiety, don't sit there and tell them, oh, get over it. Just get over it. Stop thinking about it. No, encourage them to talk to other people where they can get help. It is a real issue, and it is a medical and professional issue for some, but as we've been saying every week, it's a spiritual issue for all of us. And so that's why we've been talking about this passage. That's why we've been talking about the most highlighted, I believe, it's the most highlighted verse in the Bible. It says, do not be anxious about anything. In fact, when some of you read this, you get anxious because you're like, you feel like it's saying you should never be anxious. And you're like, I'm anxious all the time. And so what am I doing wrong? And so let's go into the original context. I mean, go back to slide. The word for anxious is when your mind is divided 100 different ways, right? It's when you're preoccupied by the meteor shower of what ifs. And what he's saying here is do not let anxiety permeate every area of your life. Or as we've been saying each week, it's this. The presence of anxiety is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is optional. I mean, Max Lucado wrote that. He wrote the book Anxious for Nothing, which is the source material for a lot of what you're hearing from me. I couldn't have said it any better myself, and I love what he says. If you're experiencing anxiety, welcome to what it means to be human. It's unavoidable. If you're hoping to avoid anxiety, that's the wrong hope. But the prison of anxiety, you don't have to get stuck there. It's optional. There is a way out. And so what is the way out? Here's where Paul begins. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Like the first step out of the prison is to rejoice. Yes, the way that we said it is to celebrate the truth about who God is. In fact, fundamentally and practically, the best thing that you can do when anxiety begins to show up is to celebrate or focus on what is true. Focus on the truth. Why? Because anxiety is imagining a threat and getting stuck. Anxiety is imagining a what if. It's thinking about all of the what ifs and then it's getting stuck in that what if. Why? Because you can't solve problems that aren't in front of you. And so you get caught in this mental thought loop of solving for all of these what ifs, and it becomes debilitating. And so you got to focus, you got to come back to the truth. And spiritually speaking, we got to celebrate the truth about who God is. Why? Because your beliefs shape your behavior. That's why I've been saying, for those of you that don't believe in God, or you're exploring faith, or you're here with a friend, first of all, I'm so glad that you're here. I think it's awesome that we have people who attend our church who don't believe everything that we believe, but they're willing to engage in community and go on the journey with us. But don't mistake, I think you need to evaluate what it is that you believe in. I would love for you to believe in Jesus the way that we do. Why? Because your beliefs, whatever it is you believe is true about you, whatever you believe is true about life or about God, is going to shape how you respond or behave in the midst of anxiety. And if you think life is really all up to you and you get to decide, I hate to break it to you, but the truth is we control a lot less of our life than we think we do. So man, your beliefs are really important. How do we practically live this out? Well, you've got to ask God specifically for what you need. We talked about this last week. In that passage, Paul says, don't be anxious about anything in the next verse, but in every situation, we looked at these three words last week. By prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Essentially, Paul gives us three different words for prayer. He's being redundant. It's like, bro, don't you think we know what you're talking about? No, it's intentional. A general prayer or approach to God, asking him for help, and requesting a specific need. And too often we leave it general. No, God wants us to ask specifically for what we need. Why? Because he doesn't know? No. He wants you and I to go on that kind of root analysis journey because he knows that our personal clarity will open the door to helpful progress. And so we talked about the importance of asking specifically for what we need. And so we should do that if we're going to get out of the prison. But within this same verse, there's another important step that we need to take that might be easy to miss. And so I want to look at it again. He says, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, not the worst case scenario. Remember, prayer is a first response, not a last resort. In every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, you've got to present your specific need. You've got to present your specific request to God. I don't know when the last time was that you gave a gift. Or maybe if you've received an award for something that you've accomplished in your life. But when you present a gift, when you're presented with an award, if somebody like hands it to you, vocalizes, they give it to you, that they let it go, and they don't take it back. I mean, that's what it means to present something. You're kind of letting go of it. It's not, oh, it's yours for a couple of hours and then I'm going to take it back. That's called borrowing. So if any of you want to present me with a Jeep, I'm not going to argue with you, okay? Jeep fever is still real. Now, for those of you that let me borrow a Jeep for a day, like Ed at West Toledo, or this past week I got to borrow a Tesla for a day. Come on, that's the most fun I've had driving in a while. That's great. But when you present something, what do? Essentially what he's telling us is this. You need to leave it with God. You need to leave it with God. You need to present it to Him. Maybe you're better at this than I am, but you know what I tend to do? I tend to tell God about it, and then I take it back. I take it back like it's a pet. You know, I just keep it with me through the day. It's like, oh yeah, this anxiety. Have you ever heard how we talk about our pets to other people? It's like on the one hand, it's like you love your pet, and then the next sentence is like, oh, they tore the couch apart. Can you believe it? But look at this cute little pet. You know, it's like. And I think we do that with some of the things that we tell God. We bring it to Him and then we take it back. We pray about it and then we pick it back up. No, that's not what He's talking about. You got to leave it. You got to learn how to leave it. And here's the thing. Even when I try to leave things with God, even when I try to leave it in His hands, and I'm like, I'm going to leave it there and I'm not going to pick it back up. You know what? I find myself a little bit like this. It's just me trying to monitor the thing that I left in God's hands. Hey, God, it's just me again, checking up 5 minutes later on whatever it is that I've left in your hands. I love Barbara's posted this earlier this week on her Instagram. I'm like, man, that is so true. It's like, yeah, I'm going to leave it with God, but I'm going to check in, like micromanagement, you know? Like, are you sure you got this, God? In fact, if you're living in a bit of this season, this past week, Barbara released a new Bible study. She's a speaker and author. She's a part of our church. We're really excited about this new installment that she's offering people. And so maybe you feel like you're waiting on God. You're constantly checking in on Him. This may be a great resource in your own spiritual journey to check it out. And man, I am so glad. Barb's traveling right now, but I'm so glad she continues to be a part of our church and investing not just in us, but in churches around the country. Now, some of you are arguing with me already. How do I know? Because I would do the same thing if I were sitting in your seat. I'd be like, yeah, but, you know, I didn't really ask for anxiety. It's like, I don't really want it. I don't think it's cute. It's not a pet. So just to say to leave it, no, anxiety sneaks up on me, uninvited, like this. Boom. It's like it's there again, and I don't want it. I want it out of my life. If I could just stop anxiety, I would. So it's cute, Ben. Leave it with God. Yeah, that's right. Just tell me. I'm sick and tired of people telling me to just stop thinking about it. Did you notice that it can be really easy to confuse leaving it with stopping it? And I think sometimes we think leaving it is stopping it. We just tell ourselves, I just got to stop being anxious. I got to stop thinking about this anxiety. I got to stop thinking about it. It's futile. It would be like me sitting here going, I just got to stop thinking about the Notre Dame loss last night. I got to stop thinking about it. I got to stop thinking about how they got so close in the last 2 minutes. I got to stop thinking about it. Or maybe you've heard me say before, stop thinking about a pink elephant. Yeah, a pink elephant. Stop thinking about it. You got to stop. See, the more you tell yourself to stop thinking, the more you try to get yourself to stop, the more focused you become. No, if we're going to leave it with God, do you know what it means to leave something? It means you drop it, and if you're leaving, you move in a different direction. I'm going to leave this thing behind, and I'm going to move towards something else. That's what it means to leave. And so if you just think, stop, hey, here, God, here, stop. No, that's not what it means to leave. If you're going to present something, you're going to present it, and you need a new direction to move towards. And Paul gives us this in the passage. So look at it again. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition. It's easy to just slip right past this. With thanksgiving, he says, present your request to God. When you're going to present it, the way that you leave it behind is you set your sight. Paul is giving us the new direction that we need to move in order to leave the specific request with God. This is the way that I put it in the notes, is that you got to leave it with God, thankfully. That you're going to leave that anxiety, that moment, that what if with him, and you're going to turn your focus to fill your life with thanksgiving. Before you call the cliche police or I roll me out of the room, why do we need to do this? Because it's your bottom line today. Anxiety and appreciation can't occupy the same space. Anxiety and appreciation, they cannot occupy the same space. And the reason I saved the bottom line for a little later in my talk is I was concerned that if I led with this, if I tried to introduce the moment by talking about that, some of you would be like, appreciation? That's so pansy-pansy. I mean, how is that helpful? I mean, it doesn't work for me. In fact, some of you right now are going, I can be anxious and be thankful at the same time. As I started thinking about it, I'm like, okay, there may be a way to be anxious and to be thankful at the same time. But if that's you, you know what your life looks like? Your life looks like Zoe in Scotland who tried to get inside of a little tight car and she got stuck. Have you seen this video online? Yeah, it's hilarious. A little disclaimer, if you decide to watch it yourself, I watched it a few times and their Scottish accent is so rich, they may be swearing, I just couldn't pick up on it, so just heads up, earmuffs for the kids, right? They tried to get her out of it in this video. They're beating on the car, they're pushing on the car, they're trying to push her head out, and she's screaming. She's like literally stuck. For an hour, she's stuck in this car. I mean, at this point, it's like, I'm never going to get out of here. And eventually, they had to bring out a bread knife to cut her out and set her free. Hello? Maybe that's Zoe. So yeah, maybe anxiety and appreciation can live in the same space. But I promise you, it's going to feel like a prison. And if anxiety and appreciation are living in the same space, one is going to be louder than the other. In order to get out, you're going to have to leave it with God. And you're going to have to redirect your focus to fill up with thanks. Why? Because anxiety is focused on threatening what ifs. That's what anxiety is focused on. Appreciation is focused on life-giving what is. That's the difference. One is stuck solving the what-ifs, consumed by the what-ifs, worried about all of the what-ifs, multiplying the what-ifs. Appreciation has a clear view of what is true. Appreciation isn't just seeing what is true, it's looking for the life-giving things that already are true. And you know why this is a challenge? I don't know about you, but when I'm dealing with some anxiety in my life, when I'm worried or my mind's divided or I'm trying to solve for the what-ifs, and can I just say, for those of you that are leaders, for those of you that lead business, you're in business, part of the reason we're in leadership is because we have to think about the what-ifs. This is part of our job. And so you may have more anxiety than you tell people because you just feel like it comes with the territory. It does. It's when we get stuck and all we think about is the what ifs that life becomes unhealthy. And I know for me, when I'm dealing with the what ifs, when I'm stuck with all the threatening what ifs, you know what? My feelings, I don't really feel like appreciating anything. It's like, come on, man, that's not helpful. You know what I feel like doing? I feel like freaking out. I feel like getting frustrated at the people that are causing all of the what if questions. I feel like getting angry. I feel like working twice as hard. Sometimes I feel like running away. Sometimes I feel like quitting my job, driving a bread truck, because on Monday, if I'm driving a bread truck and a train wreck happens, it's just fluffy bread that floats everywhere. Nobody's going to get hurt, you know? Sounds amazing. I don't feel like appreciating anything. What that reminds us is your feelings are true. You're probably not going to feel like appreciating anything. But remember, even though your feelings are true, they don't tell you the whole truth. I love the way that Michael J. Fox talked about his own dealing with anxiety. He said, don't spend a lot of time imagining the worst case scenario. It rarely goes down as you imagine it would. And if by some fluke it does, listen to this, you will have lived it twice. Did today, some of you need to leave. Not stop, but leave it. And even though you don't feel like it, you need to move your focus towards appreciating the life-giving things that are true. Here's a practical way to live this out. I call this the leave it jar. And I think some of you need to get one. Now, that's not permission for you to go out and spend $300 on a really fancy looking, nice, decorative, it's going to fit our living room just right, leave it jar, okay? Find something simple and practical. If you want, you can call it the God's Got It jar. And the idea is very simple. Whenever you're feeling anxiety, instead of letting it permeate your whole day, set an appointment. You can give yourself permission to be anxious during this moment here. And you can be as anxious as you want to be. And what I want you to do is to pull out a little piece of paper. And some of you, you might need a whole big piece of paper, whatever it is. And I just want you to be as honest and write out as true to you what it is that you're anxious about. Give every detail. Leave no stone unturned. Write every what if down. For me, it's not a jar, it's a journal. And so I just go to my journal and I write it out. All of the emotion. Why? Because your feelings are true. Then what I want you to do is I want you to take it and leave it in the jar. Because your feelings don't tell you the whole truth. Now, is that going to solve all of your anxieties? Yeah. I'll give you a money-back guarantee. No, it's not. It's not going to turn off anxiety. You're going to begin practicing not letting anxiety drive your life. And you're going to begin telling anxiety where it can go. And you're going to leave it here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come to that same pile of paper. And you're going to write down at least one life-giving truth that is true today. Let me give you an example. It's amazing how in our culture with the access to the Google, how one little bump or sniffle or ache in our body leads us to believe that we have cancer, okay? And so, and there's those of you that really have cancer, that is a traumatic experience in and of itself. But the number of times I've self-diagnosed myself with cancer is laughable, okay? Why? Because you go and you search for it and the symptoms inevitably point to some chronic, debilitating disease. And what happens? All of the what ifs start to come up. What if I can't handle the treatment? What if I don't get better? What if it really is cancer? What if that means I lose my job? What happens to my kids? Who's going to marry my wife? What are we going to do with the house? How are we going to afford this? All of the what ifs. And here's what you can do. You can write them all down and you can leave them here because you need to validate those feelings. You can't just turn them off. They don't just go away. And then what you do is you leave it here. And then you pick up a truth. What is true? You leave the what if, and you pick up the what is, and what is true. That I am healthy enough to engage with the people that matter most today. So let's not let the what if ruin or take away from what is true. Simple practice. You're not always going to feel like it. But that's what it means to leave it thankfully with God. And I think practically we can all do that. What I like about this passage, though, is there's something more going on that might be easy for us Americans to miss. Because when we think of Thanksgiving, we think of a holiday in November. We think of saying thanks maybe before a meal or to people polite. We think of manners. But in this passage, he doesn't just say to leave things with thanksgiving. The word here is Eucharistia. It's a spiritually significant word. Some of you can hear elements in there that sound familiar to you. The word Eucharistia means thanksgiving. And so when he says, by prayer and petition, with Eucharistia, with thanksgiving, present your request to God, it has roots in another word that some of you know. It's called the Eucharist. Here's what's challenging about that word. Some of you, it brings back traditional church, maybe even the Catholic Church. Others of you have no idea what the Eucharist is. It's when a church participates or Christians participate in what's called communion or the Lord's Supper. They take a piece of bread and some wine and they remember Christ's body and Christ's blood shed for them. They physically take those elements, the bread and the wine, into their body as a symbol of what Christ has done for us. And the problem is because tradition and time and maybe distance from the church or distance from the original intent is taking place, this has become something that's very divisive and confusing for people. Am I allowed to take it? Am I not allowed to take it? Do I have to belong to the church? What are the rules? Am I doing it right? Did a priest bless it? They're nowhere in the Bible does it say a priest needs to bless these elements. For some of you, that's shocking. For some of you, that sounds blasphemous. But in the first century church, they would celebrate Eucharist. They would celebrate bread and wine whenever they would get together with Christians in their own homes. Why? Because they wanted to remember something significant to them. They wanted to give thanks for something that God has done. What is that? Well, if you look at this word and you break it down a little bit further, the "eu" is the Greek word for good, or like wellness, good things. The charis is the Greek word for grace or divine gift, a good. Essentially, when you participate in Eucharist, you're celebrating the good and gracious gift that Christ has given us. In fact, the Greek word for Christ is Christos. You have a bit of that in the Eucharist. And so whenever you celebrate the Eucharist, you are taking in, physically, you are receiving. Spiritually, you are remembering what is true. This is why they did it every time they gathered together. So in light of all of the what ifs, remember Paul is writing this from prison. He doesn't know if he's going to live. The Philippians that he's writing it to, they don't know what their future is. When Paul is writing this and he's saying with thanksgiving, he's not just talking about the physical things of life. He's talking about reminding them to not lose sight of what Jesus has already done, what is already true in Christ. So when he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with what is true here, with what is true about the good gift that God has given you, with a full focus on what God has done, then present your request to God. Then leave it with Him. So the way that we leave it is by fully receiving, giving full thanks, remembering fully the grace that God has for all of us. You see, part of the problem is some people have heard this phrase, maybe you have even said this phrase, that God will never give you more than you can handle. It sounds good. I think I understand the intent, but this isn't in the Bible. This phrase is not in the Bible. Some people maybe take this passage in 1 Corinthians 10:13 out of context and says, God will never tempt you more than you can handle. He's talking specifically about temptation, not about life. If God never gave you more than you can handle, then it assumes that God is giving you all of the difficult things in life, number one. Number two, it implies that if you have more than you can handle, either you're screwing it up or God is screwing it up. And number three, if God doesn't give you more than you can handle, or if life doesn't have more than we can handle, then what role does God play in our life? Jesus knows that life is more than we can handle. Look at what he said. He said, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. You got more than enough to think about today. Tomorrow is way more than you can handle. That's why Jesus talked about our Heavenly Father. Sees you as someone who matters to Him. You're valuable to Him. You don't need to worry. Even though life gives us more than we can handle, do you know what we can find our hope in? That God promises to be there when life gives us more than we can handle. That God actually delights in coming shoulder to shoulder with you in life's most difficult moments. And so Eucharistia is thanking God for the promise that He has already overcome the more that we can't handle. Eucharistia is remembering that even though Jesus gave His body and shed His blood, even though He was defeated physically, even though He took all of sin upon Him spiritually, even though He was betrayed, even though He was dead, he came back to life. And that same power that brought Jesus back from the dead lives inside of every person who surrenders their life to him. That is what is true already for you, those of you who follow Jesus. And so when he says Eucharistia, he's not just talking about life, he's talking about the power, the new identity, that you're a son and daughter of the Most High God. And we need to live from that place. In fact, later on in this same letter, he says something that I think might be the second most highlighted verse in the Bible. Some of you have heard this before. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. And some people use this as a ticket to try anything crazy in life. That's not what he's saying here. In fact, if you take this out of context, you miss the significance of this. Look at what he says in the verse before this. He says, I have learned how to be content, thankful. I've learned how to be thankful with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing, as if all of the what ifs came true. Or with everything. All of the what I wants came true. He knows how to do that. How? I've learned the secret of living in every single situation. In every single what if. Do you know how we survive? By remembering what is true. That I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Now this is difficult. Because it means we have to admit when we don't have it all together. It means we have to be honest about the ways that we get off track. It means we have to be clear about the other things that we've made more important or more valuable than God's good gift of grace in our life. But when we remember that grace, when we remember that nothing else matters, it changes everything. A couple of months ago during one of our staff meetings, Mikey Biddle, arts pastor down at the Findlay campus, just shared some of his spiritual journey that God has had him on over the past few months. And he did it in such a candid and honest way. It was so powerful for our staff. I think it illustrates this journey so well that I asked him to share it with all of you. And so let's watch.
My family was hardworking, middle class. My mom and my dad both worked full-time jobs to give my brother and I everything that we needed. But there were things that we wanted to have that sometimes they just had to say no. And I think some people might walk away from a situation learning how to be content with the little things in life. But for me, it kind of had the reverse effect. I felt like I almost needed to make up for lost time. Like I needed to spoil myself because I wasn't spoiled as a kid. I started playing music when I was about 12 years old, and then my brother started a band with some of the youth in the church and asked me if I wanted to be a part of it, and I said yeah. And then as we started to get better and get more recognized around the area, we started to all take it a little bit more seriously. So I felt like if I was going to be playing that consistently, I needed good stuff. And from there, it just kind of kept evolving into this love or this addiction to have nice things, nice gear. When I was a younger kid and I didn't have a job and I didn't have anyone to be responsible for, it was easy to drop a bunch of money on something that I wanted. But when you have a family to provide for, it's not easy. One of my family's biggest desires was to own a house. I started selling off all my equipment to pay all that debt off so that we could get a house, and we did. But then I found myself kind of slipping back into that addiction of wanting to get back all the stuff that I had gotten rid of. I've probably owned between $40,000 to $50,000 worth of music equipment, and I don't really have anything to show for it as of now. It's really created a lot of worry and remorse for me. There were nights when I would just lay in bed, obsessing over whatever it is that I just purchased, and just couldn't shut my brain off. I was so amped up for whatever it is that I bought. That kind of feeds that adrenaline aspect until it arrives at your door, and then the excitement kind of goes away, and then you realize oh, this isn't really what I thought it was going to be, or that kind of worry or remorse sets in. You're how am I going to pay for this? This wasn't a good decision at all. It got to a point where my guilt had reached an all-time high. The debt that I had created had reached an all-time high as well. And I've struggled with depression for most of my adult life. And there were a couple of moments where I laid in bed and just thought to myself, like, would me and my family would just be better off if I wasn't here. That it wasn't fair to them what I was doing. It was very selfish, and I didn't have their thoughts in mind, and I just figured maybe they'd just be better off without me, and I wouldn't have to hurt them anymore. A friend of mine sent me a song called Nothing Else by Cody Carnes. I thought it was a good song, but I didn't really connect with it on a personal level. It ended up getting programmed for a weekend service. I don't think that was by coincidence at all. So when I started learning the song for the weekend, I just kept hearing the phrase, I just want you, nothing else, over and over. And God would use those words to convict me. I've been letting my buying addiction, rule my life instead of letting God rule my life.
I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song and take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you, and I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry when I forgot that you're enough. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. I'm caught up in your presence, and I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave.
The line took me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. Just kind of reminds me of the first time that I accepted Jesus in my heart. I wasn't worried about what gear I had, and I think sometimes we need to think about that and go back to that moment when nothing else mattered. I knew that I needed to make a change in my life, and so I started kind of evaluating all of the things that I had and trying to decide if it was a necessity or not, down to one guitar and just everything that I need to do what I do at church. That's a struggle for me to look at what I have and just say that's good enough. So if I'm content with the things that God's blessed me with, I'm not going to have to worry about constantly getting the next best thing. I can just be happy with what I have. I was reading a verse in Matthew 6, it talks about to not worry about everyday life, to not worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, or the clothes that you're going to wear, because isn't there more to life than that? And the next verse talks about how the birds don't store away food in the barns that our Heavenly Father feeds them. So aren't we more important than the birds are? And it talks about how you can't add any minute of your life by ordering. So it just made me realize that there are things in life that are absolutely necessary for us, and God gives those to us every single day, and everything else is really not that important, and that we really should work on at all.
Mikey, thank you so much for watching with your team and your campus down in Findlay. I think one of the reasons I love working here so much is because we have an incredible team. And I have a feeling part of the reason some of you are experiencing what you're experiencing is because as a staff team, we're on the journey with you. We're figuring it out too. We're leaning into what God is inviting us into to know Him, trying to figure out the areas where we need to find freedom, celebrating our unique purpose and looking for ways to make a difference. I think that's why you're experiencing some of that in your own life. Man, when you're a part of a life-giving movement of people who are not pretending to have all of their crap together, and instead are just saying, hey, here's where I'm at. And here's what God is doing. And here's the courageous step that I'm going to take, because nothing else matters. And that's why I love this place. That's why I love going on this journey with you. So today I am so excited to invite some of you to practice that right now. Because some of you have been carrying some things that I'm going to invite you to leave here today. You may pick them up again in a couple of days, but right now, we're going to practice leaving it, presenting it, giving it to God. Why? Because He's got it, and He's good. And this isn't you stopping it. It's you leaving what you can't stop and what you can't control with Him. And the way that we're going to do that is by directing our focus on the good gift that He's given you. That your anxiety no longer defines you. That He does. That's why He says, do not be anxious about anything. This does not have to define who you are. No, in every situation, with prayer and petition, with Eucharistia, with God's good gift of grace, you can leave it, you can present it to God, and look at what happens. Then the peace of God that we're craving, that our community needs, that people can't find anywhere else. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ. Not in your feelings, not in your strength, but because of what Christ says is already true. So today, some of you need to leave some what-ifs. Some of you need to leave the worries about what people are thinking about you, your worries about your reputation, your business, your future, your health, your kids. Some of you just need to leave your worries about your worries. And I'm going to give you an invitation to do that by receiving the good gift that He's given you. When you came in, you were handed a little communion packet. If you don't have one, if you slip your hand up, our dream team would love to get one into your hands. If you're watching online, hit pause and go into the kitchen and get a couple things that you can participate. And if it needs to be Cheez-Its and water, make it Cheez-Its and water. Some of you traditional folks are like, can he do that? Remember, it's less about these things. It's more about remembering what Christ says is true for you. For those of you that aren't following Jesus, my only disclaimer is that there's no shame in not participating. It would actually be hypocritical for you to take the bread and the juice. And so if that's not where you're at, I'm glad you're here. Just let it pass by. Don't feel any obligation. In fact, if you don't feel like participating, we're not going to shame you or call you out and look down on you. I love it that you're a part of our community. If you're taking your first step of following Jesus and you want to do that, use this as your prayer of faith. Essentially, your faith is believing that Jesus accomplished things at the cross that bring forgiveness and new life. The way that Jesus said it, if you want to open that top layer, is He took a piece of bread and He said, this is my body for you. A little over 24 hours later, the disciples saw Jesus' body physically mutilated. They fully didn't understand it. The same meal, Jesus took a glass of wine. If you want, open that little cup of juice. He said, this is my blood shed for the forgiveness of new sins. And He incorporated a word called covenant, a promise. That because of what Jesus accomplished for you, God can forgive, can rescue, can redeem whatever what if you're carrying right now. And so no matter how bad it gets, no matter how bad you feel like it's been, no matter how scared you are about your physical life, Jesus says, because of my body and blood, the best for everyone who trusts and believes in me. And so we can leave today the stuff that we've been carrying to pick up these good gifts of what God says is already true. You can leave the what if by celebrating what is. And so God, we say thank you right now for the incredible gift of your grace. May this be what we are focused on in the midst of all of the anxieties that come. But God, today, anxiety does not define us. You have already done that with your grace. And even though we don't deserve it, even though we can't do anything to earn it, we say thank you for giving your body and shedding your blood to give us hope, to know that we can change and that there's a future that is anxiety-free that you have made for us through Christ. And so we receive this today together in Jesus' name, amen. Let's remember him. And as the band plays this next song, let's connect our hearts to these truths. Let's confess. Let's remember that nothing else matters.